Hello everyone and welcome back to our final segment of the day and the week here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And again, we return to that really interesting Sunday Night Football matchup that's going to take place between the Eagles and the Rams, particularly looking at it from a fantasy standpoint now, because yesterday, purely from a betting perspective, we look at this one. And this one is full of fantasy potential for both teams because we know the talent that is there on both rosters. It's just a matter of who you feel comfortable selecting. But hopefully this stardom sit-em segment that I present to you today really helps you determine if you have any players at stake in this game who could be the difference for you this week, because it's going to be the last game that many people are going to pay attention to this week. And I feel like we're going to have to start off with the Eagles here because they feel like the team with all the momentum coming into this game. They look like the team that is really going to be the challenge to the Detroit Lions on the road. We get the playoffs, and it's all coming down to their complementary style of football through the effectiveness of their offensive weapons and the timeliness of their defense that's starting to round into form here. Let's start off with the offensive side of the football with a must start, I feel like, at this point in the season because of the way he's really settled into this offense. Jalen Hurts. I feel like Jalen Hurts is an immediate start at this position. And when I look at it, I just feel like, even though there's going to be skepticism about this little run that he's had because of the fact that he's prone to make mistakes, he still is someone who I trust in terms of just playing within this offense, playing within himself, because we know that more and more skepticism has gone out to the offensive play callers, particularly Nick Sirianni for this team. But Jalen Hurts has been really stepping up as someone who's having more say in how this offense operates. And so with that level of confidence in himself and the other players in this offense, I feel like, Jalen Hurts just has to, at this point in the season, be an immediate starter in your minds. And so, with that, you got to go with Saquon as well, because they're kind of a pair right now. They're kind of one of the best tandems in the NFL right now. And I just feel like, a lot of people might be skeptical to see when they falter, and they might be penciling in this game against the Rams defense is really starting to ramp it up a little bit as the game where both of these guys finally give up the ghost a little bit. It's just because of the fact that right now I don't feel anyone's really stopping them. They've found their groove together. Saquon's really settled in, more than settled in his new home in Philly. And they're just going to prove it because that's what good teams do. Against these tougher opponents, how you show up matters, and the Eagles have already proven. They've done it once against the Commanders, and now they can potentially do it again against the Rams. And not for nothing, I feel like this Rams team is just too weird at the moment to handle two players like this. So they're immediate starts. In terms of the sit-em department for these Eagles, and not many players jump out as potential sits here, but I do want to mention one because he's been a guy who's had an up and down season, a lot of peaks and valleys, and that is Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert is someone who I feel like is among that tier of tight ends where you never really know their effectiveness. It's potentially like a tier 3, tier 4 guy, but in certain games they can shine for you. But this week, it just feels like a weird matchup for him, right? This feels like when all of these weapons for the Eagles are playing well and coalescing, someone has to suffer. It's always the same that I'll present to you when you are kind of looking at these teams with so many weapons and you're having trouble trying to decide who's going to be on your bench. Dallas Goedert just feels like one of those guys who's going to suffer week in, week out based off of the talent of this team. And so, against a Rams defense who, might be playing a little bit more man coverage, he's going to have to, try and overcome what these looks are, but I don't necessarily see him doing just that because going to be hyper focused on what Jalen Hurts and Saquon can do in this game and how effective they are going to be. And so that's why I feel like he is going to not necessarily be as big a factor. As Tap to Learn also says, what do you think of Hurts over 225 passing yards? I'm not necessarily certain about that one just because he can be so effective in many different ways. He doesn't necessarily have to affect it through the air. But I feel like there are going to be a lot of opportunities to test this Rams secondary as he's going to be trying to find that deep shot down the field to guys like Brown and Smith. But I think that for this game, it's just going to come down to how much of the ball Saquon sees as well, and how he factors into perhaps the receiving game as well. But I do think that ultimately Hurts will just do enough to go over. And then in terms of D. Robinson, as he mentions here, under 26.5 receiving yards, I think that's the move, because I don't really even have him on this list. I don't necessarily see him as big a threat as people think for this Rams offense. And it's a perfect segue into talking about this Rams offense that really can be so multi-versatile. Starting off with Matthew Stafford, though, I don't necessarily think this is going to be his day. I think he's going to be a player you're going to have to avoid this week. And it's just because of the fact that, like I said, I was lucky last week in guessing that he would be someone you should start. But he is someone who isn't always going to be a pencil-in kind of quarterback for you. He is someone who has those high highs, like he did against the Pats last week, but then has the lowest of lows in games that you're really wondering where has he even gone. So that's why I feel like week in, week out, I can't rely on Matthew Stafford as much as, say, a guy like Jalen Hurts. So that's why I don't necessarily see this being the best day at the office for the quarterback position, for the Rams at the very least. But then I do think that Kyren Williams can be a very effective player in this one for the Rams. He kind of quieted down after, that consecutive touchdown streak, but I do feel like this is the game where if they want to keep it close, they're going to have to make it about time of possession, because I do think, that this Eagles offense, as much as Saquon's going to play a big role, wants to take that deep shot. Jalen Hurts is going to feel that way too. And so what the Rams are going to want to do is be timely. And being timely involves getting a guy like Kyren Williams going, especially on early downs, because he's a very physical back, and he can break off a couple runs as well. So look for him to use his versatility early in this game to both A, make sure that the Rams maintain possession, and B, try and put some points on the board. As Tap to Learn acknowledges, the Eagles' defense has been incredible. And so I feel like you have to find one aspect of your offense that you feel can attack this Eagles defense effectively enough to maintain possession and put some points on the board, like I said. But then in terms of the receivers, I feel like the receivers in this game are going to be a huge focal point, because I think that the Eagles secondary is one that is really opportunistic, and I compare them to a defense like the Packers where takeaways are their MO. It doesn't necessarily feel like the Eagles' MO is takeaways. It's more about being so sticky in coverage, understanding their roles, understanding who the leaders are in that secondary, and really coming together to be a fearsome unit that's making them as effective as they have been in generating these takeaways. And so I do feel like, though, that at least one of these receivers, particularly Puka Nacua, could have a big game just because of Puka's ability to kind of play the game like a tight end wide receiver hybrid, find the softness in coverages, run effective routes, use his intelligence to understand different defensive looks. But it will come to the detriment of a guy like Cooper Kupp, who, even though is a very effective piece in this offense, and this Eagles defense will certainly have to account for him. I feel like, this game's going to be more about the guy who can generate his own looks more effectively, and it's becoming Puka Nacua at this point. Don't get it twisted. Cooper Kupp has always been effective, as you know, getting open for his guy. But Puka Nacua has also been following that mold and might be even better at doing it than Kupp. And I feel like, the Eagles are going to be hyper-focused on stopping at least one of these receivers, and Kupp is going to be the more likely to either be double-teamed or chipped at the line. Press man coverage all night long. There's going to be a tough test for him trying to create his own space, whereas Puka is going to get a lot more open looks, and just because of his savvy as a receiver in his second year, even with all the injury struggles he's faced, he's really going to have a nice day, I feel like. Whether or not it keeps the Rams to this game is really up in the air, and it doesn't necessarily matter from a fantasy standpoint, but I do think he's going to be effective enough for you to say, I can't leave him on my bench because of what he could mean in this game. When I look at this game, especially from a fantasy standpoint, you can't really go wrong in terms of two offenses that want to move fast and loose. For the Eagles, it's going to be all about Jalen Hurts and Saquon really meshing, and then, Jalen Hurts really opening it up down the stretch. And then for the Rams, it's going to be all about opportunism. And what I mean by that is on both sides of the football, be opportunistic. Try and generate takeaways if you're the defense. Try and keep the football if you're the offense. And most importantly, put as many points on the board as possible, because you're going to have to keep up with this Eagles offense as much as possible. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. Should be an exciting NFC matchup, but that will just about do it for the show today and the week here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for tuning in all week. Remember, like, follow, and subscribe to the show on the network. Make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. But other than that, we'll be back here Monday at 3:30 as always. But other than that, I'm out for the week. Have a great weekend.